You're cleaning. What time is it there, Julie? Are you from the UK? Or are you from here in the US? Hey, Danielle. I was just answering your text saying yes. I said, yeah, come listen. And there you are. Is this clear? Is it clear or staticky? Because it's showing up real staticky here. Not staticky, but like not clear at all, like a really bad connection. Is the picture clear or no? Julie went to clean, and here she wanted me to read. Julie, get back over here. Okay, it looks dim but clear. Okay, all right. Hey, Tracy. It's not that dark. I got the kitchen sink light on you. Julie, are you in the US? Or are you out of the country? You live in a different country? Or do you live in the US and you just clean at night? Which I used to do when my kids were little. I do remember that. Just a vampire? Oh, really, Tracy? Hey, Iva, Zarek, Tiamo. We're all vampires here, Ivica. Welcome. Do you speak English? Okay, we're going to read. This one's a little bit risque subject matter. Oh, well, nice. They're blowing kisses. Well, thank you. Okay, we're going to get started. I'm so sleepy too. This one's called Bohemian Rhapsody. Get my drink of water. He's waking up, I heard my father say. I cracked my eyes open, trying to figure out where I was and what was going on. But the light was too bright, forcing me to close them again. When I tried to move my head, a sudden wave of vertigo left me disoriented and nauseous. Nauseous. I am tired too. I reached out to steady myself, but couldn't. My arms were bound to the chair that I was sitting in, as were my legs. What's going on? I asked, squinting and blinking until my eyes adjusted to the light. Where am I? As my vision cleared, I saw my parents standing on the other side of the kitchen table, neither of them making a move to help me. Isn't that creepy? Why am I tied to the chair? I asked, looking from my father to my mother. It's for your own good, my mother replied. We're going to save you from a life of sin. Well, just relax, Danielle. What? I was confused. My head felt heavy, and it was hard to focus my thoughts. Did you drug me? The last thing I remember was sitting at the table eating dinner. I had brought home some takeout from that chicken place my parents loved. I was trying to put them in a good mood because I was finally going to tell them that I was gay. No, I did tell them. I remembered everything now. Neither one of them said a word after I declared my sexuality. My father turned to Mother, letting the piece of chicken he was holding drop onto his plate. My mother got up, grabbed the pitcher of tea from the refrigerator, added what I thought was some extra sugar, and then refilled my glass. Oh, you've done a lot of work, Danielle. Danielle was texting with me earlier tonight. She told me all the work she's been doing the last couple of days. That's crazy. That girl don't stop. She has to have the cleanest house in probably her whole state. Let's see. Okay, here we go. We needed you out of commission while we decided what to do with you, my father said. What the F are you talking about? I said, struggling against the bonds that held me. My mother leaned across the table and slapped me as hard as she could. You will not use that language in this house. My eyes began to water. I tried to hold the tears back, but I couldn't. Look at you, crying like a little girl, my father mocked me. You always were a little sissy. I'm not surprised. You're a queer. Why are you doing this? I sobbed. I couldn't understand why my parents were acting like this. I knew it would be hard for them to accept that I was gay, but I didn't expect them to tie me to the kitchen chair and torture me. The worst case scenario I had planned for was them kicking me out. You brought this on yourself by being a homosexual, my mother said. Lucky for you, we know how to fix that. I don't need to be fixed, I said. This is who I am. If you can't accept that, I'll leave. Just untie me. I already had a bag packed and ready to go, waiting for me in my closet. All three of us turned our heads toward the front door when someone started knocking. Help! I started yelling as my father left the kitchen to see who was at the door. My mother slapped me across the face again. I've wanted to do that for so long, she spat out the words. You know your father and I always suspected you liked boys, but we could never prove it. Thanks to your little confession during dinner, now we don't have to. Help! I kept yelling until my voice was hoarse while my mother mocked and taunted me. Whoever was at the door didn't seem to care that I was in distress. Between my cries for help, I could hear my father talking to whoever was at the door. He was acting like nothing was going on. Are you sure you don't want to join us? I heard my father ask. The person at the door mumbled something I couldn't understand. All right, Pastor, my father said. We'll see you on Sunday and let you know how it went. Thanks for bringing this over on such short notice. Pastor. My father shut the front door and walked back into the kitchen with a thick white book in his hand. Was that Pastor Reed? I asked. Why would a religious man just stand there and ignore my pleas for help? It was, my father said. He told me to tell you that he's praying for you. What was that supposed to mean? Give me the book, my mother said, reaching out to take the tome from my father. My mother set the book on the table and began flipping through the stiff yellowed pages, searching for something. The text, from what I could see of it, looked more like artwork than words. The calligraphy was beautiful, and the ink that was used made the pages shine. Thank you, Danielle. What is that? I asked, looking at the pages. Looking at the pages filled me with warmth. This is none of your business, my mother said, lifting the book off the table so I could no longer see the pages. An unexpected sadness overcame me when she pulled the book away. Here it is, my mother said to my father, pointing to a page in the book, the purity rite. Do we have everything we need? My father asked, leaning in close to my mother so he could read the book. Let's see, my mother said, running her finger down the page. It says we need 7 white candles, a handful of rose petals, a basin of holy water, salt, and an egg. An egg? My father scoffed. That's what it says, she replied. What the F is going on here? I yelled, testing the strength of the ropes that were tied around my wrist and ankles, hoping to loosen them enough to pull free. Unfortunately, I wasn't strong enough. All I did was give myself a rope burn. Hey, Whisper. Let's see. My parents looked at each other, then over at me. What did your mother tell you about that kind of language? My father said. I'm sorry, I blurted out. I just want to know what's going on. I could feel the tears wanting to pour out of my eyes again, but I held them back. What's that book? I looked at my mother and then over at my father. And what is the purity rite? There was a small part of me that hoped this was all some sort of sick joke, but I knew it wasn't. The crazy, gleeful look in my parents' eyes told me that they were seriously committed to whatever they had planned for me. We might as well tell him, my mother said. If it works, he won't remember anything anyway. And if it doesn't work, he'll be dead. Beautiful woman. You don't get out too much, do you, Avika? But thank you, beautiful old woman. I could be your grandma, I'm sure. You're not getting out of those, my father said. Wait, no. I didn't like the sound of that. I didn't care how many burns I got from rubbing against the ropes. I wasn't going to sit there and let them kill me. You're not going to get out of those, my father said, walking around the table to stand next to me. I made sure of that. I stopped trying. He was right. There was no way I was going to be able to loosen the knots he had tied. Shouldn't I get a say in what happens to me? Begging and pleading was the only thing I had left. If you let me leave, you'll never see me again. I won't tell anybody about what happened tonight. It will be like I never existed, I swear to God. God doesn't listen to people like you, my mother said, walking around the table to stand on the opposite side of me. But don't you worry. The Lord has provided us with the book of virtue so that we may cleanse your soul. My mother set the book on the table in front of me and placed her hand reverently upon it. That's insane, I said. I was an atheist. I didn't even believe in God, but I wasn't going to tell them that. When my parents had decided to become religious a few years ago, I thought it would just be a passing fad. I never thought they'd become fanatics. Remember Troy Daly, my mother asked? Yeah, I said. Troy was a kid who went to my school before a skateboarding accident turned him into a vegetable and sent him to a mental hospital. It was his parents that had convinced my parents to start attending church with them. What does he have to do with any of this? It wasn't a skateboarding accident that put him in that hospital, my father said. His parents tried to save his soul and ensure his place in heaven, but the devil's hold was too great. His mind couldn't handle the glory of God. Don't worry, my mother said, placing her hand on my shoulder. You're not like him. I'm sure we can save you. Troy's folks waited too long to perform the ritual. They should have performed it years ago, if you ask me. Your father and I always knew that kid was a bad egg. I think we've told him enough, my father said. Quite right, my mother agreed. It's getting late, and we need to get started. Where do you want to do this? My father asked, following my mother into the kitchen as she started gathering the necessary materials for the ritual. Why did the air come on at 68 degrees? That's surprising. It must be humid in here or something. What if something goes wrong? Like with Troy, he said. You remember how close the Dailies came to be investigated by Child Protective Services. Oh, this guy must be a minor. Good point, my mother replied. Maybe we should do it in his room. That way, if anything happens, we can stage it to look like an accident before we call anyone. Hot air whisper, right? Yeah. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I thought my parents' sudden religious fervor was crazy, but hearing them talk about this ritual was far more insane. I didn't believe in magic any more than I believed in God, but that gave me an idea. Maybe if I played along, I might get them to lower their guard at some point so I could escape. Are you going to be able to move in by yourself? My mother asked. I don't want you throwing your back out again. He's not that heavy, my father replied, grabbing the chair I was sitting in and tilting it back. I didn't say a word as he dragged me down the hall and into my room. Sit tight, my father said, patting his hand against the side of the chair before walking out of the room. He left me in the center of the room, facing the doorway. Once he walked out of sight, I began to scan my room, looking for anything I could use to help me get out of the chair. I couldn't find anything. While I waited for my parents to return, I stared at the poster hanging over my bed. Out of all the posters that adorned my walls, it was my favorite. It was for the band Queen. It featured a phoenix with its wings spread. Below the mythical creature was a prodigious letter Q, flanked by two lions. Sitting on top of the letter was a crab, while two fairies sat near the bottom, looking up at it. In the center of the Q was an ornate crown. Below all of that was the word Queen. Knowing what I know now about my parents, I was surprised they let me hang it on my wall. I got the poster before I even suspected I was gay, and before I even knew anything about the members of the band. I'd be shocked if my parents didn't know the lead singer was gay. I wouldn't have started listening to the band if it weren't for my parents. They would always listen to the classic rock station when we drove anywhere, and Queen songs were played frequently. I remember the first song of theirs I fell in love with after hearing it for the first time. It was We Will Rock You. I heard it one morning while my father was driving me to school. I remember asking him who the band was after the song ended. We will rock you. He told me the name of the band and then said, if you like that one, you'll probably love Another One Bites the Dust. Another One Bites the Dust. How could someone with so much hatred towards me for being gay be a fan of a band like Queen? Unless it wasn't gay people that was the problem. That, ha- that had to be it. They didn't have a problem with gay people. They just couldn't stand the fact that I was gay. They were being selfish and couldn't bear the thought of people knowing that they had created a gay child. The more I thought about it, the more I thought I was right. Whisper. Put everything on the bed, my mother said to my father, pointing at the bed with one hand while cradling the book against her chest with the other. My father walked in and dropped the box he was carrying on the bed. What now? My father asked, turning to my mother as she opened the book and began reading over the instructions. First, we need to use the salt to draw a seven-pointed star on the floor around Lawrence, she replied. That was the first time I heard her use my name, since I woke up tied to the kitchen chair. A seven-pointed star? I can draw a five-pointed star pretty easily, but I've never seen one with 7 points, my father said, walking over to look at the book on my mother's shoulder, over my mother's shoulder. Get another drink. Hold this, my mother said, thrusting the book into my father's hands. I'll do it. My father and I watched as my mother grabbed 2 salt containers from the box and began to draw a seven-pointed star around me. While she was on her hands and knees pouring the salt, I had the overwhelming urge to spit on the back of her head, but I didn't. It would have made me feel better, but only for a moment, and that wasn't worth the slap I would get from my mother in response. Done, my mother said as she got to her feet and placed the empty salt containers on my dresser. Now we have to place a candle on each of the 7 points. I can do that, my father said, handing the book back to my mother. Should I go ahead and light them? He asked after the candles were in place. Not yet. We have to place the bowl of holy water first. Where does that go? My father lifted the bowl and jug of water out of the box. Place it at his feet. My mother pointed to the floor in front of me. Are we supposed to bless the water before we put it in the bowl? My father held the jug of water above the bowl, ready to pour it. I don't think it matters. Oh, shite. We forgot the egg. Whisper. Language, mother. I didn't mean to say it out loud, but it just sort of slipped out. I bet you think you're funny, don't you? My mother slammed the book closed with one hand and took a step towards me. When I saw her raise her hand to slap me, I clenched my jaw, bracing myself for the impact. I wasn't trying to be funny. I just didn't like being held to a different standard than my parents. Let it go, Jean, my father said. He's just trying to rile you up. Why don't you go to the kitchen and grab that egg, and I'll bless the water so we can finish this. He won't have such a smart mouth after tonight. Don't you have to be a priest to bless water? I waited until my mother had left the room before I spoke. No, go on, Mittens, go. She's wanting to sit on the napkins. Go lay on your bed. Go on, baby. I wasn't trying to be a smart arse, saging the room. I honestly thought holy water had to be created by a priest. If you attended church with us, you'd know the answer to that, my father said, pouring the water into the bowl. I guess that means you don't need to be a priest to create holy water, I thought. I watched as my father pulled a beaded chain from his pocket. Attached to the end of it was an ornate cross. My first thought was that it was a rosary of some kind, but that didn't make sense. I was sure my parents weren't Catholic. As I thought about it, I realized I didn't even know what denomination their church was. They never mentioned it. My father placed the cross in the water, dangling the chain over the side of the bowl. I couldn't make out the words he was saying, but they sounded Latin. When he finished speaking, he stood up, lifting the cross out of the bowl by the chain. Then he leaned over me and placed the chain around my neck. The cross was cold and wet against my shirt. Every little bit helps, he said, stepping away from me. Here's the egg, my mother said when she returned to the bedroom a few moments later. She held the egg out to my father. What am I supposed to do with this? He replied, taking the egg from her hand. Put it in the bowl, she pointed. He bent over the bowl, and let the egg roll off of his hand and into the water. The last thing we need to do is light the candles, my mother said, and then we can begin. My father reached into the box and grabbed the lighter, using it to light the candles. He was careful not to disturb the salt pattern on the floor. After the candles were lit, he tossed the lighter back into the box and went to stand beside my mother. Once we say the incantation, we need to prick our fingers and place 7 drops of blood in the bowl. My mother reached into the pocket of her pants and pulled out 2 safety pins, one of which she gave to my father. 7 drops total or each? My father asked. Each, she said. All right, let's do this, my father said. My mother reached out and grabbed my father's hand, squeezing it as she smiled at him. I couldn't believe how excited they were. It was pathetic. I sat there as they recited the words from the book, which sounded like a bunch of gibberish to me. When it was time for them to prick their fingers, my mother went first. If I could have reached the bowl with my foot, I would have knocked it over, but I couldn't, not with my ankles tied to the chair. Something's happening, my father said, backing away from the bowl after adding his drops of blood to it. I looked down at the bowl, trying to see what my father was seeing. He was right. Something was happening. The egg was absorbing the drops of blood before they could disperse in the water. That has to be some sort of trick. It's working, my mother said, staring at the bowl in awe. I need to get out of here. I frantically tried to free myself, rocking the chair from side to side as I struggled against the rope tied to my wrists and ankles. All I managed to do was tip the chair over on its side. My father took a step towards me, intending to lift me back up, but my mother stopped him with a hand on his arm. It doesn't matter now, she said. Look. She pointed at the egg floating in the bowl. It's really happening. I had to lift my head off the floor so I could see. At first, I couldn't tell what my mother was talking about, but then I saw the cracks. The egg appeared to be hatching. That's impossible. My mind still clung to the idea that this was all just an elaborate hoax. When the egg burst open and spilled its contents, my mother gasped, "That's not supposed to happen." Hundreds of wriggling gray worms had suddenly filled the bowl. I turned my head away and gagged, not because of the worms. It was the smell that came with them that made me sick to my stomach. It smelled like raw sewage. Right, Whisper? Yes. It was supposed to bloom, my mother said, turning to face my father. That's what Beth said happened when they performed the ritual with Troy. Maybe we did something wrong, my father suggested. Why don't we get a new bowl and try again? That's not going to happen, someone said from the hallway outside my room. I didn't recognize the voice of the person who spoke. They had a British accent, and I didn't know anyone from England. I didn't think my parents did either. Who the hell are you? My father said. I didn't get a good look at the person until he stepped into the room, standing between my parents as he put his arms around their shoulders. He was wearing blue jeans with a white tank top. Around his waist was a studded black belt. A smaller matching band was around his right bicep. I recognized him immediately. Freddie Mercury? He looked exactly like he looked the day he performed at Live Aid. Well, almost everything was the same except for his eyes, which were solid black orbs. Who am I? Freddie said. Don't you recognize a killer queen when you see one? He looked down at me and smiled. Get your hands off of me, my mother yelled, trying to pull away from Freddie, but he just pulled her in closer. "Oh, how I love fat-bottomed girls," Freddie said, letting my mother go so he could slap her on the arse. Okay, Danielle, this is almost done, I think. And then I'm going to go to bed, too. My mother whirled around, intending to smack him, but she suddenly found herself frozen in place after Freddie snapped his fingers. My father lunged at Freddie. "What did you do to her?" "Don't stop me now," Freddie said, sidestepping my father's attempt to grab him. Before my father could turn around, a snap of Freddie's fingers rendered him motionless. I watched from the floor as Freddie walked to the bowl of worms and squatted in front of it. The smell didn't seem to bother him. I cringed when he placed his index finger in the center of the wriggling mass and swirled it around. I watched in amazement as the worms stopped wriggling and became stiff right before they started sprouting flowers. "That's much better," he said, standing up. The nasty smell was replaced by an overpowering floral scent that burned my nostrils and forced me to breathe through my stomach. How did he do that? And what did he do to my parents? Freddie cocked his head to the side so that it was the same level as mine. "It's a kind of magic," he said, reading my mind. Then he winked at me. "What say we get you off the floor?" He made a quick gesture with his hand, and the chair I was sitting in returned to its upright position. It happened so quickly that I felt a little dizzy afterward. "I don't think we need those anymore." Another gesture from his hands, and the ropes binding my wrists and ankles fell to the floor. "Thanks," I said, rubbing my wrist. "My pleasure," he replied. "Is this real?" I finally asked after a few moments of awkward silence. Am I really Freddie Mercury? Is that what you're asking?" I nodded. "No, I'm not," Freddie sighed. "When people summon me with these rituals, I have to take a form that's relevant to the situation. For example, when the Dailies summoned me, I took the form of Amanda Potter. I knew who Amanda Potter was. She used to go to school with Troy and me, but she committed suicide several months before Troy's alleged accident. "Why her?" I asked. "Because Troy was the reason she killed herself. He R would her and left her pregnant, and then turned the school against her. I had heard the rumors circulating about her, but I didn't know Troy was the one responsible for them." "He got what it was coming to him," Freddie said, smiling. "He's Radio Gaga now." He pointed his finger at the side of his head and twirled his finger to indicate that Troy was crazy. Right, Julie? It's from a book I purchased on Amazon ebooks. Short stories, creepy ones. Pretty dumb, huh? Let's see. I thought the ritual was to save people. That's what my parents thought. I looked over to see. I looked over at them to see that they were both looking over at Freddie and me. The rest of their bodies were frozen, but they could still move their eyes. That's what most people think, but they're wrong. The purity rite doesn't purify anything. It's a judgment, a measure of one's purity in the eyes of God. All who take part in the ritual are judged. Your parents tried to play the game without knowing the rules. And now it's time for the hammer to fall. What does that mean? It means they've been judged unfavorably, and I must pass sentence on them. As Freddie spoke, he walked around them, running his hand along my father's back before moving over to my mother and doing the same thing. They aren't good people. They have twisted that crazy little thing called love into something perverse and unrecognizable. They were never going to accept you. This probably won't come as a surprise to you, but your father was hoping the ritual would kill you. That doesn't surprise me, I said, standing up. The sudden change in elevation after sitting for so long made me lightheaded. What about me? Have I been judged? I asked after my head cleared. You have, and you're free to go spread your wings. He spread his arms. So, all of that talk about homosexuality being a sin is a lie? I asked. Of course it's a lie, he replied, lowering one of his arms while pointing at the ceiling with his other hand. God doesn't care who you love. The Almighty just wants you to find somebody to love. Gender is only important for procreation. That made sense to me. Why would a celestial entity care so much about who we love? What happens now? I asked. I felt awkward standing there, not knowing what to do with myself. You're going to have to figure that out on your own, but I feel it's only fair to warn you that once I'm done with your parents, the authorities will be looking for you. Freddie moved to stand next to my mother, placing his arm around her shoulders. Why would they be looking for me? Why do you think they're going to, who do you think they're going to blame when they find their bodies? He ran the back of his hand down my mother's cheek. You can stick around and watch if you want. I wasn't sure that my parents needed to die, but I wasn't going to argue with Freddie. I was content to leave with my own life. No, thanks. I think I'll leave, I said, walking out of the room. Hey, kid, Freddie called out as I stepped into the hallway. I turned around. Keep yourself alive, he said, tossing me my father's wallet and car keys. And thanks for this, he gestured at his body. I haven't had this much fun in centuries. I stared at him for what felt like an eternity. I had a million questions I wanted to ask him, but I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answers to any of them. Better run along now, he said, breaking the silence and motioning for me to leave. The show must go on. The end. This dumb story, wasn't it? Hope that got you relaxed. I know it's got me relaxed. I'm going to go get in bed. Thanks, guys, for listening. Have sweet dreams. Don't be too scared. Night, night. Oh, did you like it, Karen H? It was kind of dumb, but not what I thought, but well. Good night, Tracy. Yeah, Julie. Good night, Whisper, Danielle, Karen, Teresa B, Danielle Z, anybody else that was listening. Good night, guys. Let me say bye. Got it. Here we go. End stream. Good night.